Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Children's TV presenter here. So my name is, as Justin said, David Phillips, and I am a pretend Canadian, which means I live in Canada, but I'm not Canadian. And I'm very polite. And I'm delighted to have an amazing array of speakers who I'm not going to introduce fully because we have not enough time. We've only got the next 3 or 4 hours to go across a fair. If we keep it short, we should keep that brief. Thank you for laughing, panel. You should have laughed too because it was funny. So we have Mark Farida.
Faraba.
I've got to start it right. I even wrote it down. Sarah and Paul, and you can see what they do up there. They all have jobs which they can't explain to their parents, which is good. So I'm going to start and hopefully continue with some fairly simple questions. And then what I want to get to, if we can, is some of the sort of real reasons why things do or don't happen. And I was mentioning this to a couple of you before, that it's great when you have these conferences where we all agree in theory about what we should do. What we need to get to, I think, is underneath that, why aren't things happening? And they can be boring, they can be small, they could be awkward. But if we can bring those things up, then we can begin to solve them. So I'm going to start with my basic question, and I'm going to start with faraway Mark, which is from Australia, which is why you're far away.
Yep.
But a couple of I'm going to bring another couple of you in afterwards. So when it comes to attribution of outcomes, where have we made the most, we collectively TV, where have we made the most progress?
Well, I can speak to what we're doing, or what we've done. We spent a huge amount of effort and time, and by the way, it doesn't directly pay. That's another hidden kind of message. I've never found a way to make attribution pay, at least up to this point, but I'll come back to that perhaps. The foundation data asset that some of you out there might have heard me talk about in the past is something we call multi-view, which is a fusion of set-top box data from Foxtel, our parent, with supermarket, retail, and financial services data. And that panel is, well, it's a number of things. First of all, it's become, the output to that panel, multi-view segments, have become generic planning standards in Australia, which I haven't seen anywhere else in the world. So we're very proud of that, I think, and rightfully so. But going specifically to the question you asked about attribution, I think it was just about 2 years ago now, we produced a whole flight of attribution studies using the multi-view panel as the kind of technical underpinning, working with some of our clients in the market, in the Australian market. And my God, it was tough. Not producing the result, in fact, it was quite similar to some of the things that we heard 605 talking about earlier on. Not because it was tough, because it's relatively easy to do if you've put the effort, as we had done, into making the thing robust from the get-go. I don't think any of that's difficult. I don't think any of it is stellarly challenging, but I think the bit that is challenging, and it's stellarly challenging, is getting the market to accept those things and value them. So I'm almost going straight to the thing you just said, David. Here's another hidden secret. It's very, very tough. Everybody talks about attribution, but nobody's doing it. It's a bit like sex. You know, it's that kind of thing. We all talk about it endlessly. I was fascinated with what Joe Marchese said earlier on about don't go down the outcomes route. We take a different view, but I actually think I agree with Joe and with Jamie West at Sky, which is a bit of a weird statement. But in essence, we took the view that you have to prove the value of your medium in an increasingly challenged market environment. You don't have a choice. And we went to our core data asset to do that, multi-view. And the agencies were initially perplexed by it. They then asked, can we mark that up and resell that to our clients? They then said, we're not going to pay for it, maybe our clients will. So you get into that kind of nexus of doom where nobody wants to pay because there are hard costs associated with each of these activities, of course. But we kept on going because ultimately we were in it for a longer game. We were trying to use the attribution work to prove empirically, or to start to prove empirically, the efficacy of TV as a medium. And this ran alongside some work that actually Ubiquity did for Think TV, which was mentioned earlier on in Australia, which was very, very successful. And it showed exactly the same information. It showed that TV, guess what, isn't serially broken. It produces incredible attribution results. So we've spent a lot of time doing that. Can I sit here today and tell you that I know what we're going to do with it? No, I can't, because the jury's out. You know, I know that we can do it. I know we can do it better. I know we can do it more granularly. But then what, I think, is a legitimate question.
We will get to that. Thank you. Thank you also for doing most of my job. If you can carry on doing that, do what he did. So, Sarah, I think that was fantastic, and it gives us lots to get into, as well as a quick summary of what TV is doing well, which is working. Sarah, from your point of view, when you're looking to buy it or looking to assess it, what do you think, in terms of outcomes, TV is doing well, where it's progressed?
Well, I would say that, so I'm a planner within a media agency, and what I think TV is doing really well at the moment is enabling us to be more creative than we've ever been able to be before in the ways that we deliver our clients' KPIs. So, and there are various different ways that we can do that, but what is great about TV and its sort of surrounding channels, so we've got to think from a video point of view, and that does include social channels, that does include search and various other media channel opportunities we have. So what we look at, we've got Sky have been making a charge with analytics, with attribution, but they've been in the game a long time. But we do use those internally, so we have many clients that we work with, and we're able to use the Sky panel. We segment the audiences if they can give us their consumer data, then that enables us to work really hard for them, because it's all about optimization, essentially. It's all about making those that TV spot work harder for you. And if we have information about the client and their viewing habits, and Sky can model that very well for us, then we're able to actually profile our campaigns based on that, and then we're able to, at the end of the campaign, look at actually what uplift that had against certain segments that we've built within their systems. So, you know, that's really interesting, and it enables us to put a price on it. So there's a value, there's a revenue, and as we've been talking about today, we're obsessed with everything being as cost efficient as possible, and you know, it's great to be able to say to a client, look, TV does work, and it works on very many levels. Even though we have segmented your audience on TV, we're not able to target specifically you know, this segment of clothes buyers or whatever. We will target them through optimizing your spots, essentially, your day parts, your day of week, all of those things. But what it will give us is an element of, you know, qualified revenue, I guess, associated with that optimization. And that's really valuable for clients.
Excellent, thank you. Where do we need to do more? Where does TV need to work better? I'm going to turn to you, Farah.
I just want to add on to that, and then obviously go into what we can do more of. I think, you know, this attribution and getting into, you know, really an allocation of how should we be considering funding going forward, which is really the right question to be asking clients when working with them when attribution is an objective. Because it's not about, let's do attribution because I want to determine if TV as a platform is relevant anymore. I think when you go into an engagement such as that, then you're going to have some outcomes that are going to be those you can't explain. But here now we have an opportunity where we're seeing, especially in the US, with clients and their agencies, and using TV set-top box data, such as what TiVo provides, that we're able to get under the hood and help them get into the granular components of television as you've been able to do outside of it in the digital or nonlinear space. So when the approach is made to do attribution, it really is what's the objective. If the objective is to understand, if we're going to now decompress the ways that content can be, or compress the way its content's being consumed, then we have to realize that the outcome could be very different than what you expect going in, because the data sets that we're now able to combine are not disparate data sets anymore. They're not siloed and we're looking at them independently and then doing some funky back of the envelope stuff to figure it out. What we can do now, because of the digitization of television and how you can take set-top box data, for example, and associate it with an ID that then is anonymized, and then run it through a device graph, and then link all the devices in that household to everything in every way and any time they're consuming content. Now, okay, I want to understand how should I be allocating my funds across those devices or mediums of campaign execution. So what TV now needs to do a better job is really educating that it is, I keep saying the TV, but it really is a platform. It's a platform, it's a mechanism for delivery of content that is the same as what we have on our phones, as well as what we have. It's just a bigger screen, and it's on a wall. That is stationary. So you can have many individuals coming and going versus the individualized impact that you have with the device. So I think when it comes to what we have more work to do is really to really bring forth and educate the market of these very granular components that could have an impact on the outcomes, because we're not used to them. It's second by second data. It's deterministic. At one point are they switching away or going back? It's not about what happens in a minute or an hour. It's every second of time. So I think that we have more work to do in demonstrating that the outcomes could be different than you expect or want to hear. Might not be as good a news. And that's where more education is involved.
I have two people waving their fingers at me. So Paul,
Yeah,
then
jumping at
then
the
Nearmark. Paul first.
Okay, so
Nearmark.
So what I find interesting about this conversation is, so from my perspective, my frame of reference is majority US. We do have some international clients, but they're primarily in the digital and digital publishing world, not in the linear, where in the US, 70+% of our business is US broadcasters. So from an attribution as to effectiveness, I would make the assumption that responsibility falls on the agencies and the buyers because they have the data, and unless they're willing to open up the data within their portfolios, you as a provider of inventory won't be able to do that. But what we can do, and I think you're right, a lot of the things are being connected, though there are still, there's still the granular, being able to cut up the demographics. The US is behind where you are here in the UK. I mean, me personally, I think one of the big reasons Comcast was so interested in Sky was to learn and to acquire technology to help them figure out how to do a better job approaching the US market. And even free TV, I mean, in the past 2 years, people accessing free television has increased from 16% to 20%. So as there's been some cord cutting, and until the ATSC 3 comes out, where we can actually see that part of the demographic, targeting's kind of mixed because you have some set-top boxes here, you have other providers here, and those aren't combined yet in a buy.
Yeah, actually, the topic of TV attribution, we lived it firsthand in Altice A4. It requires a total reset of expectation and understanding. If you look at today's expectations of the clients, they look at TV, they still want to use all the data from today that they have access to in the market, but they're still thinking of TV like 20 years ago. Yeah. So 20 years ago, when an advertiser spent $1 to promote an ad on TV, they had 3 guarantees. They reached 100% of the constituents of a household. They reached them 100% linear, and they got 100% of their attention. Had they had today's data 20 years ago, they would have had a perfect attribution. Did TV influence the outcome? Today, fast forward, TV is 2 out of 15 screens in the household, only 2, and their computers on the wall. And they have data, but these 2 screens do not influence the same outcome as they used to be before. When I started running A4, which is the advertising arm of Altice, I was pushing clients to try to understand that we cannot really force conversion of their product by promoting on TV. And I never really understood the position that we were in until Altice moved their brand advertising to A4, and they said, now you're responsible for spending $200 million advertising Altice. And we connected the dots because we have a lot of data. And here's what we found out. TV leads to 3 types of attribution, but you require 3 different data sets. If you have set-top box data and census level data, you can, what 605 talked about is brilliant because they can prove conversion with attribution based on viewership. Did you see an ad? Well, they talked about Walmart, but their capabilities also can show you, you saw an ad on TV, did you, for a program or a tune-in, did you watch the program? That's a one-to-one direct relationship. You can prove it on TV. Second attribution, which requires geolocation data. Very rare to acquire unless you're a mobile operator or you have apps-related data where you saw an ad on TV, did you go to the store or to the location? But there is no way you can guarantee a conversion because if the price is expensive, what Joe Marchese spoke about earlier, you can't control it, but you drove them to go somewhere. The third type of attribution that we're seeing now as an advertiser and as an ad sales organization at the same time, we notice when an ad on TV is effective, it drives a step called search. People literally go on search because we have IP data. We can prove that they went to the website and they search. But that doesn't mean it's a conversion of a buy of a product because if the price is expensive, the salesperson or the service is bad, and whatever you can't confirm that you could have a conversion. But attribution on TV today requires a total reset on the advertiser side and on the agency side who's selling the product of TV, because TV does work, but it leads to different type of attributions, and you can only measure it depending on the data sets that you have.
And I think just the other component that we don't even, whether it be to drive them, that could be a very important KPI, but what we don't have control over is the persuasion and the copy strength. So we're looking from 10,000 feet when we're doing these analytics and combining these sophisticated, complex data sets. And you can drive a horse to water, you can bring them to a website, but if they're not converting, there could be something else that is, inherently wrong. And it's not the media, it's the copy. So if you know that the old saying that 60% of the decision making is made because of the creative, is that what we have an opportunity with these granular data sets as we're starting to get more embedded within planning and outcomes and then circling it back into planning again, is it should have an integral part that is woven within the creative execution and bringing what are those silos together to help really maximize the outcome of an attribution study. Because until we have that, then that's the missing piece. I can't control the persuasion strength of a campaign. I can only bring you the audiences or at least send them to where they need to go.
You can bring the horses to the websites.
Yes.
Yeah.
But part of attribution, right, is when we talk about converting to sales, this is all call to action, right? So I think what ends up as we become more and more data focused, I mean, my background is corporate finance, so not media or technology. It's like horrible.
You're amongst friends. That's fine.
But one thing I can tell you about numbers is when you look at financial analysts, their analysis of the future is always has a much higher correlation to the past than it does to what actually happens. So it's become really data driven. We become more and more call to action, and there's the loss of branding and sometimes in these numbers as well. So attribution for branding should be part of that equation. I think sometimes it's not.
So I think we've been circling around that a little bit, and which is how do we do something that is right for TV when TV can be so many things? And so I first want to tackle that, and then I want to, in the back of your heads, think about something which is we seem to be going in two divergent areas, which is let's do these fantastic, singular, bespoke solutions, which are amazing, and let's also make TV simple to buy, which seem opposed. So why don't we tackle that one first? So Sarah, you're seeing with the whole time, you're sitting with clients and you're sitting with the data. How do we balance those two things of getting it right specifically for the client without introducing a huge amount of sort of overlay and complication.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, I'll do that first. So there's these two things going on. There's making it sort of very custom and bespoke for a client, which is glorious and amazing, but I do want to get to the point about it still doesn't tackle creative and other issues and that kind of stuff. But bespoke and great versus we need to make this simple, we need to make this easy to transact and to understand and to plan. They seem to be divergent things. So how do we balance those two things out?
I'll
just give you a really hard question. How about that?
Yeah.
That I didn't prep you for.
Yeah. Thanks. So I work with loads of different clients all across the business. We are seeing more often that there are response clients who we encourage to do brand advertising. We also encourage them to understand the value of that brand advertising. We look at actually, rather than this 60-40 Burnett and Field, we do testing and research based on actually when have we seen the best impact of the mix that we've got. And we defer to the data that we have, and in some cases it might be 60-40, but in others it's 50-50. So, we have to do client-specific research. When we're thinking about the outcomes for them, I might be totally going off topic versus the question that you've asked. We do also have media owners who offer us outcome-based solutions. So we can make it as specific as possible. For example, one of our clients, we were offered a solution from a digital partner who we identified that somebody had to spend more than 3 minutes on their webpage, and that is more likely to lead to whether it's a sign-up or a sale. And they were prepared to offer that as this is what we will charge your rate based on. We've also had publishers who are happy to talk to us about specific outcome-based solutions. So we can be very client-specific. In terms of how we measure that, obviously if we've got outcomes, then it's fairly easy to measure. There are lots of different factors along the way, depending on what it is that we want to show. So brand versus attribution, sales, sign-ups, that kind of stuff.
So there's a ton we can do. How do we make sure that what is done is appropriate for TV? And I'm going to look at FarMark for this. So how do we make sure that it's capturing what TV's good at and not just putting a model that is inappropriate?
I think you mentioned, for me, you mentioned where the answer lies a minute ago when you talked about making things much more simple. Most of the buy-side entities we talk to on the agency side, or when we talk to direct advertisers, that's what they say. They say, we live in a data-driven environment. Data is a kind of, it's a condition precedent in my core business. I need to be able to use my data, my first-party data, and yet your first-party data process is different to Joe's, to Jane's, and whatever. So when I think about things like OpenAP, that's what I think about. There are loads and loads and loads of comments we could all make about OpenAP, and God knows it's got its limitations. But at the core, it's quite smart because it's trying to simplify and standardise an emerging market situation. That's what it's trying to do. So in the Australian market, we're trying to do that. We're having mixed success for cultural reasons, but I think that will improve over time. Everybody wants to do things in their own way, but in the end, advertisers and agencies want simplicity and the ability to transact across entities like ourselves. And that's probably the biggest single challenge that we have. We think the world begins and ends at our front door, and it doesn't. And wrestling that one is really, really tough. Really, really tough, because what the fella down the road will do in data terms is not necessarily what we'll do. We might have a church and state aversion to some kind of device ID strategy, whereas Network X might take a completely different view. And again, without naming any names, this is starting to happen in the Australian market. There's a device IDs arms race brewing, and it's because a lot of the free-to-airs in the Australian market have found Jesus in the form of .com. So they've been absolutely shite at making something in data-driven terms out of their linear position, but they found God in .com. And all of a sudden, they've realised there's humongous value in that, particularly given the way that the buy side wants to transact now. So that's causing all kinds of stresses and strains in our market. And it feels to me like, I'm going to have to use the first C word, it feels like we do need to find that way to collaborate, otherwise we'll just drown. Because I look at the game that we're all in, whatever territory we're in, and God, we'd like to make it more complicated, don't we? I mean, Jesus, I think it was at the Future TV Advertising Forum in Sydney, the inaugural one in February. Again, I won't name the person. It was an agency person. But we just announced in Blaze of Glory a strong initiative I told you about earlier on, which I can talk about more if you want me to. And the person who's chairing the session happened to be an agency person. This isn't shit-canning an agency person. She said, well, can't it do X, Y, and Z, and can't it turn it inside out, and can't it be green on alternate Thursdays? And we've got to stop doing that. We've got to make what we do more robust and sustainable, it seems to me. And we've put a lot of effort into that, and for us it's very much still a work in progress. But I agree with what Paul said. Attribution comes in many, many flavours and forms. But there just isn't enough discussion and debate. That's the truth of it. It feels like there's loads of debate. There actually isn't. So when people go away from this building today, they'll go back to their day jobs and they'll go back to the transactional nature of the business that we all operate within. That's a real issue, it seems to me, when we're looking at the kind of change that we're actually coping with at the moment, all of us. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it's happening, though. I mean, we're just so accustomed to the model where the agency pools to help manage the inventory and, make a profit off of it. And that is using one set of data to help, that's based on those standards and those benchmarks to price against and deliver against. That's blowing up because the clients, the brands themselves are getting access to this data themselves.
Yep.
And so there's a sophistication level. I met with a major retail client last week that built their own device graph. They're ingesting every type of granular data set and building a stack, and they still have an agency. But what they're doing is ensuring that the performance metrics, the outcomes are done by them, not the agency. And I think that is more of the model that's going to evolve, is that it's not going to happen with every client because they're not all as sophisticated. The tier ones are going to go first, of course. And they're the ones who are going to drive the media buy, not the way that it's done today, because they're going to be built and they have the assets, they have the talent pool, they just need the warm bodies. They don't have enough hands to do everything. But now, as you saw with companies like Mighty Hive getting acquired that have that specialization of helping brands get more sophisticated to do them themselves, that's the direction we're going in, and that we are going to have to get everybody to get used to. Custom is the way it's going to go forward because every client's going to manage their own data set. They're not going to share it or pool it, and I don't blame them for PII reasons. I would expect
sorry, can I just jump in there? It's kind of interesting you say that because, and I agree with that statement about not sharing data, but that's exactly what we're asked to do. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So an advertiser will come to us and say, we want all your data. Oh yeah. Well, I've got a paid customer base that puts bread on my table, and you think we're just going to give you our data? And I'm afraid the quality of the discussion and debate in this industry is sometimes, not always, but sometimes at that level of sophistication, i.e. not very sophisticated at all.
Can I just when you said, oh yeah, in that accent, it did sound appropriately threatening.
Yes, it was supposed to.
I felt quite scared.
But I hope I did it a little bit more diplomatically in the live situation.
But
maybe I didn't.
What I think is interesting in the US, because a lot of our clients are the large broadcasters who sell locally, they're already selling multi-level packages, right? They're not, so on the national level, the NBCs, they may have this open API, which I have an opinion on it, which I think you could tell.
You're on a panel.
But
yeah, you're supposed to.
Yeah, I mean, generally, I think it's great, but I don't think a lot of people, The people who are embedded in today are all cable companies, right? The people who are joining with them. The rest of the television market's not going to join up with a major competitor. It's just, there's not that collaboration. But I think if you look at the local broadcasters, and probably within 2 years, you're only going to have 3 to 5 left in the United States, and they're going to dominate. They're going to be national companies. They're not going to be market limited. And they are actually now working together on measurement. And I think because they're selling so much in the digital world, and actually they're competing against agencies, I personally believe they will eventually come up with the metrics and a way to sell uniformly across the various markets. And I think then that will be adopted on the national level.
Paul, how does it, what's fun about now is that all the moorings are being shaken loose. And there's loads of different models, there's loads of different potential people who could win all of it or some of it, and there's, independent for third-party stuff versus first-party stuff, and it's all being shaken loose. How do you think this settles down, and in what form and when? So if you could just answer that'd be great.
So
I was told you were smart, so.
Someone misled you. So it has to go back to basics. You look at the device, you associate it to either an individual or a household. There's nothing else. If you want to go back to basics of targeted advertising, let's be simple about it. You can target either an individual or a household. There's nothing third beyond that. Maybe a far distant third, a group, right, in a restaurant or whatever, or outdoors. But that's not a target that you can measure on a name basis. If you target or use devices that target individuals, you want to run attribution. It's simple because you have a one-to-one data relationships. You delivered the ad to Paul Haddad. Did Paul see the ad? Did Paul buy the product? It's that simple. If anyone here thinks they can play in that game and win, I think we're delusional unless your business card says Google, Facebook, Amazon.
Yep.
They won that game, right? They have that one-to-one relationship. Television is a household device. You see an ad on TV, it's the whole household that gets exposed. You don't know who got exposed. If you're going to go measure data of attribution at an individual level and try to associate it back on a household level without having access to the data, either device graphs related to the name and address of that household. So this household has 14 devices, and 2 of these devices saw the ad, and one of these individuals of that household bought the product. If you can't do that association with pure data, it's hard to make attribution. So you have to fall back to one of the 3 things we talked about. I saw an ad on TV, I went to the store, and that stops there. Saw an ad, I went to the website, or I saw an ad and I saw a program. It's that level, and we live it. Like I spend $200 million a year advertising for Altice. I lived through these pains, and I gave up because on the other side, we sell advertising. So I connected the dots, and I said, stop the heresy of trying to measure if someone saw the ad within a household about Altice broadband service, and they went and bought it from us or Verizon. I can't attribute it that way because my price maybe is more expensive than Verizon. So if you go back to basics and say individual targeting leads to individual attribution, you require one-to-one data relationship. That's not a game TV either broadcasters or cable networks or MVPDs can play. We're not in that game. We don't have that data. MVPDs around the world have very precious data sets, name and address of the subscriber. Through that name and address, they can get as much information about the household as you want. Yep. These are third-party data that exist everywhere, benign. There's nothing confidential about it. They have the IP address that they issue to that household. And through the IP address with the device graph, you can identify all the devices related to that household. MVPDs need to collaborate with content providers. Content providers have to figure out how some of that cost is offset by them to the MVPDs. There needs to be that relationship. Collaboration is not for free, because to install technologies that collect that data and to share it, you need to make money or to cover that expense. Today, there are third parties, nothing against Barb and Nielsen, but there are third parties in the middle taking a lot of the money that they're not investing. They don't own the data that the MVPDs have. And they have no stake if the programmer or the content provider's revenue go up or down, or the measurement wasn't 100% accurate. But that money is held with third-party companies that's not benefiting the ecosystem. That has to be resolved. Collaboration, just for the sake of collaboration, I don't see how it's going to work without the money moving hands and changing parties, right? Where people have to understand that there are costs, gives and puts and takes, and balance it.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not simple.
Not simple, no.
You know, because, you know, clients and brands now run digital campaigns every single day of the year. So, as well as, you know, outdoor campaigns, there's a lot of noise that you can't always, and I know this is, you know, for smarter sort of analysts than me, but it's, you know, you only factor that as it's a factor, essentially. You apply a factor that takes any sort of baseline off what you would attribute to TV. But you know that TV is part of this whole attribution system. It's just at what point, you know, what role did it play in this path to purchase?
Yeah.
You know, mobile is a very interesting one. We had to do a lot of research a couple of years ago because clients were pulling loads of money out of mobile, and it was like, actually, mobile is, you know, it's present here and here within the purchase cycle, or the, you know, sort of brand awareness cycle. It took sort of geolocating around stores to actually then attribute the mobile views to actual purchase. So there's, you know, there's a lot of noise, and it's very complicated, and you know, so I don't know where we would get with this whole with the simplification of it all.
So we've only got a few minutes. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor. So thank you, Mark, for bringing up some realistic points that, like, no one wants to pay for stuff. And I think we've heard between the lines that often marketers either don't care or aren't smart enough to care. So it strikes me there's a link between those two things. That if we can persuade marketers that this is worth caring about, that unlocks money, which helps untie some of these knots. So briefly, how do we persuade marketers to care sufficiently that they unlock money? I'm going to start with Mark. Mark.
Tough question.
Me? Mark.
Oh,
near
Mark.
Mark.
Okay. Great.
And if you can do it in a threatening accent.
Okay, so I won't do it in a threatening accent. All right, then I will. No, it's a long, hard slog, I think. We are, to some extent, the architects of our own potential demise, insofar as we've allowed the advertiser to become more and more distant from us. So, as a consequence of that, they believe the bullshit that they're spun by other parties that are resident in the chain. And Paul's right. We've got fabulous data, and we're clear about the limits of that data. And we need more dialogue with the advertisers on a direct basis, because there's no question of a doubt those conversations are going to become more and more frequent. But I don't think there's I don't personally have a golden bullet answer to your question. Again, throwing back to the Sydney Future of TV forum, it was a great conference, but there was a really scary panel at the end, and it was advertisers, and the real world is they've drunk the Kool-Aid, they believe the stuff they get spun by the duopoly, and they're happy with what they get. So rather than rail against that and bark at the moon, we've got to work with it, it seems to me. And we've got to constantly demonstrate our value. And as I think Joe said earlier on, not make the mistake of trying to play the game on the turf of the person that's already won the war.
If I can jump in. So I'm going to propose a model. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'll propose a model to the industry, let people react to it. If everyone agrees that if you advertise on TV, they say 50% of your dollars are not really measured or found whether they're reaching the target or not. If you advertise on digital and mobile, you can't guarantee there's ad fraud and all that. If an advertiser says, moving forward, I'm going to take 10% of every campaign that I spend money on. 10% is for data. Whatever percentage is for the agency, whether it's 5, 10, 15, whatever. That's between the agencies and the brand. And then the rest is for the inventory. You will be surprised how many companies, MVPDs included, third-party companies, that will step up and start creating new technologies and new data sets, because now companies are going to start competing for that revenue. I mean, if you take television, $70 billion, and you say 10% of every dollar I spend is going to go for companies or sources who will provide good data sets to measure the remaining 75 or 85% or 90% of my dollars, and as a custodian, I'm a CMO, I need to do that. You will be surprised how many companies will step up, and all these walled garden data companies will start coming to the table and saying, I have better data than her, than him, than them, and buy my data.
An arms race of data and insights.
Exactly. And it becomes a product. Right now, everybody's sitting tight on their data. Nobody wants to share it. They claim PII and all that, and I agree with it. We do protect them. But if there's money on the table, people will come to the table, and you'll see the data scientists, the agencies, the product teams, all coming up with innovative answers. But it has to be part of the campaign cost.
Thank you. We have a model. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Jeff. I don't need to. Yeah, Jeff. Jeff Eels from Sky.
Oh, God.
Jeff Eels, did you find Godden.com?
Oh, we really need this at 5:30 at night, don't we? Go on.
So, yes, it's Jeff at Sky. So here's the thing. Agree with those, but all this data we're getting, and one of the things that we've got to do, and it'll be my mantra until we get it done, is we've been used to measuring linear TV where lots of people are doing the same thing. So that means we can use panels, and we can use complex algorithms to work out samples, blah, 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 yeah? And we get a thing called a log that says that Game of Thrones went out there, and we put those two things together. Well, that's kind of okay. But in the future, well, now we have lots of people all doing different things. In VOD, everyone does a different thing, yeah? Even if we all watch Game of Thrones tonight on the fabulous Sky system, yeah, okay? If we do that, we'll all see different ads at some time, because that's what the ad servers are doing. Fortunately, in the UK, fortunately in the UK, yeah, in the UK, every single ad has a unique copy number. But we're going to, for us to identify the data correctly, we need the content watermarked or ID'd uniquely. We're going to have commercials ID'd uniquely so we can pick them up. Otherwise, we will be paying a lot of money for guys like you, Paul, who do a great job to go, hold on a minute, let me go to another database and another one over here and another one over here, and we'll work it out. I think that's the Coke ad. I think. I'm not absolutely certain. We've got to get the plumbing right. We've got to get some of this plumbing right. And on the other side of it, we all actually assume that all the data that comes from Google and Facebook is correct. And I'm not entirely sure that's the right thing to do. Yeah, because we're used to our data being right. So what I'm saying, so the question is, I'm with you, right? I'm with you, but we should also be saying, get the data right. Let's make sure that we have definitions across the world, if necessary, for identifying content and identifying ads.
Can I just say one tiny point? You mentioned discussion and debate. The more I chat with Jeff, the more I learn, the more I want to do things better. And I think we should continue this discussion about debate, about the things like that actually move us forward, that seem sometimes unromantic, but actually get stuff done. So let's carry on that debate over alcohol and or pop.
Yeah, and let's thank Dave and the panels. I thought that was
Very good.